question is, what does every big block Chevy need? And the answer is a tunnel ram. But which one? This video is actually part 2 of our 540-inch big block Chevy build series. Back in part 1, if you haven't seen that video, check it out. It's right here. We took a Dart SHP 540-inch short block and subjected it to 2 builds, mild and wild. In part 2, we're going to continue. We're going to run 3 different tunnel rams: Weiand Tunnel Ram, a Dart Tunnel Ram, and a Wilson-ported Dart Tunnel Ram. Let's check out the results. Back in part 1, we ran our Dart SHP 540 short block with 2 sets of heads, cam, and intake. We ran a mild combination and a wild combination. If you have not seen that video, check it out. It'll be right here, over here. So check that out. Well, and when we ran this, we ran 2 combinations, as I said. The first one, mild combination, as-cast head, milder cam, single 4-barrel with a 4150-950 carburetor. And then we ran it with a Dominator and a bigger cam and a set of ported Dart Pro 1 heads. And the power output jumped from 635 or 636 all the way up to 770 horsepower. So we can take a look at that, and that will be our new starting point. Because what we wanted to do in this one is step things up even further. Sure, this was, this thing was making good power, 770 horsepower. Torque was doing pretty well at 662 or 3 foot-pounds of torque. So this was a good combination. If you take a look, it's got a nice power curve, and it's making good powers, revving out pretty far. But we're not really taking advantage of everything that those Dart Pro 1 heads had to offer. I mean, they flow 415 CFM, so we're kind of just scratching the surface. There's a lot more power to be had. What we needed, obviously we could go up with more cam. Really, there are a couple of things we could do here. First thing is this thing needs more compression. We're only at 8.8 to 1, which is not ideal. And there's a lot of guys out there. It's interesting. I get a lot of comments about, hey, you can't run that kind of big cam unless you have lots of duration because of the, the dynamic compression and all this stuff. You can put a big cam and you can team that with low compression. It will work just fine. It will shift the power curve just like it does with more compression, because actually what more compression will do here is raise the power everywhere on this curve. It just adds power basically everywhere, and that's what compression does. More compression on this would be better, but I didn't want to have the heads milled. What we did instead was change the intake manifold. As I said, we could go up in camshaft, but this camshaft was already working fairly well, and I don't think that we were near the potential of what this combination had to offer, despite the fact that we had low compression and we could put a bigger cam in it. So what we did was concentrate on the induction system. Now, we already had a Weiand Team G single plane intake designed to accept a 4500, and we had a 1050 Dominator on it, which is a fairly good package. But what we wanted to do is I wanted to try a tunnel ram. First of all, I like tunnel rams. I think a big block should have a tunnel ram. And we happened to have one sitting around. It's one that I had used a number of times. And it was a Weiand tunnel ram. If you've ever looked through the Summit catalog from now till way back in the day, this was a fairly popular one. And we ran it with a pair of 750 carburetors. And it looks good, and it makes a lot of power. There's a lot of misconception about a tunnel ram, and I did another video, and if you guys take a look, you can check it out. I'll put it right here. Whoa. And we ran a tunnel ram versus a single plane and a dual plane carburetor. A lot of guys think a tunnel ram is just a race-only piece, and the reality is the tunnel ram has fairly long runners, so it ends up making a lot of average power production, much more than typically a single plane. And the dual plane that we ran on the big block that I tested this on only made a little bit more power way down low compared to the tunnel ram. So the tunnel ram was kind of, if you think about it, especially this Weiand one, is kind of the best of both worlds between a single plane and a dual plane. And when we ran it here, it also did very well. So we can take a look at what happened when we ran the tunnel ram. We're at this one right here. And much like it did when I compared it on the other video, the tunnel ram basically made more power everywhere except at the very, very top out here at 7,000 RPM. But equipped with the tunnel ram, the peak power was up not a lot to 770 horsepower, but peak torque was up to 677, 680 foot-pounds of torque. And as you can see here in the 4,500 to 5,000 range, we had a pretty big change in torque. We went from 634 to 670, so 35 foot-pounds of extra torque from the tunnel ram. And since there's more torque all the way through the RPM range, except all the way out there at 7,000 RPM, if you had this tunnel ram on this big block, it would definitely accelerate faster than it would with the single 4-barrel. Now, obviously, the tunnel ram works well, but always the argument against the tunnel ram is, yeah, but it doesn't fit. It sticks out of the hood. Yeah, it does stick out of the hood. That's what makes it so awesome. I know that they're hard to see around, and they might not be ideal for your daily driver, but they sure look good. And obviously, as this test shows and the other test that I ran in the big block, the tunnel rams do make good power. But this isn't the only tunnel ram we tested. So now let's take a look when we stepped up in tunnel ram size. This is where we left off in our last test. We had gone from the single 4-barrel and the single Dominator carburetor up to the Weiand Tunnel Ram and two 750 or 850 carburetors. The reality is it's not the extra airflow provided by the carburetors, and we'll talk about that, especially in the next tunnel ram that we're going to install on here. It's not necessarily the extra airflow offered by an additional carburetor, because with a single Dominator you can make a lot of power, a lot more than this. So the carburetor itself will support enough airflow to make the power. This was basically a change in the intake design going from the single 4-barrel up to the tunnel ram. But we can get rid of the single 4-barrel now, because we're going to compare basically now two tunnel rams. So we had a Weiand tunnel ram with the two 4150 carburetors on it. Now we're stepping up to a Dart tunnel ram. And as I said before, just like with every intake manifold, every single plane and every dual plane, every tunnel ram is not created the same. There are different tunnel rams. Tunnel rams can be configured with different runner lengths and different port volumes and different entries, different plenum volumes, all kinds of things that would change the effective power curve offered by that tunnel ram. And in this case, the Dart tunnel ram obviously was different than the Weiand tunnel ram. They're kind of designed for different applications. The Dart is a little bit racier. It does have a different runner length. It has a bigger runner. It has a different entry. It has all of these things I mentioned. It has a different plenum volume. And in this case, we also changed the carburation on the Dart. The lid was adjustable, basically. You could replace the lid on the Dart tunnel ram. So we configured it with a lid to accept two Dominator carburetors. And if you're wondering why we did that, it's because so we could put Dominator carburetors on it. Because the only thing better than having a single Dominator on a big block is having two of them. But again, as I said before, the fact that we had two Dominators on there, the change in power offered by this Dart tunnel ram has much less to do with the fact that we had additional airflow, because we had basically more than twice as much airflow as this motor probably needed with the Dominator carburetors on there. But we installed the Dart tunnel ram in place of the Weiand tunnel ram with two 1050 Holley Dominator carburetors. And here's what happened when we installed that. As you can see, the blue is the new Dart tunnel ram that picked the power up from 777 with the Weiand tunnel ram up to 806 with the Dart tunnel ram, and peak torque checked in at almost 700 foot-pounds, 695 foot-pounds. So good torque. It's just that you can see our little sine wave thing happening between the two tunnel rams. It just happens at a different RPM. These are different intake manifolds, and they're designed to be designed to optimize power production at different RPMs. Obviously, we had more airflow from the bigger carburetors. But here's what happened when we put the Dart tunnel ram on, and it definitely made more power. We were up over 100 horsepower, so now we were starting to take advantage of that 415 CFM that the Dart Pro 1 cylinder heads, the CNC ported cylinder heads, had to offer. Now we're actually starting to use that with the right intake manifold. But we were not done here. We also had a ported version from the guys at Wilson who know a thing or two about airflow. And the reason that we did this was not necessarily to demonstrate how cool the guys at Wilson are, and obviously they know about airflow and know how to make it work. But I wanted to show you guys that just porting, changing the flow rate of the tunnel ram, can add power. But I want to point out the fact that obviously the guys at Wilson know what they're doing, but also the fact that this will work best on a combination that needs the airflow. If you already have enough airflow, whether it's from the carburetor or the intake manifold or the cylinder heads, if you already have enough airflow to feed the needs of the motor, putting a bigger head that flows more or an intake manifold, a ported intake that flows more, might not gain any power. But in this case, it actually did. So here's what happened when we put the ported tunnel ram on there. This is again the same Dart tunnel ram, same carburetors. The only thing that changed between this and between these two tests, between the blue and the red, is the fact that this was now a ported Wilson tunnel ram manifold on. And it worked very well. Obviously, These are not cheap. You could check with the guys at Wilson to find out what the porting is. I'm sure that it's not cheap, but obviously it's worthwhile. And what I have to say is, like I was talking about, that if you are going to port this, there is power to be had. And as we go up in power here, the gains from the porting will probably increase. So there's more and more power from extra airflow as your motor needs more and more airflow. And that's what we did here. So now we were making 833 horsepower, and peak torque was up to 712 foot-pounds of torque. So again, now we're really kind of taking advantage of what those Dart Pro and heads have to offer. And we hadn't changed the compression. We hadn't changed the cam timing. I do have to say that we did do an oil change between these two tunnel ram tests. They were both run with the same weight Lucas oil, and we didn't change that. And we made sure to mark where we had the oil level, so we put the oil level at exactly the same spot too. And so that was the only change. But I wanted to point that out and let you know that that happened. It was just time. We had run this thing. We had like 100 runs on this motor, so it was time to do an oil change on it. But we did that in between. But we did re-baseline it, and everything, everything baselined back to the same. We want to make sure that we check that stuff, obviously, before we make another change. But we changed the oil, re-baselined the motor, and all that changed. Then we changed to the new intake manifold. Then we, optimized it the same way as we did. And as it turned out, there wasn't a lot of jetting that's necessary between these two. I think we only changed one jet size between these two on the 4 carburetors, and we were just kind of looking for something else. The timing actually responded to exactly the same timing. So this was actually a good test. I mean, I like when stuff turns out like this. I would have been disappointed if we would have put the ported tunnel ram on there and it wouldn't have shown any power. But here's what happened. Tunnel ram, tunnel ram, tunnel ram. Get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what'd you think about our tunnel ram comparison on our 540-inch Dart SHP short block? Here's what I got from this test. Ported tunnel rams obviously make power. I mean, I'm not telling everybody they need to go out and spend a ton of money from the guys at Wilson, get 2 big Dominator carburetors, and put together this kind of combination. But what it does show you is there is extra power in there hiding for you guys to unleash. That tells me that you guys could port your own manifold, and I'm not saying you might be able to do the same job that the guys at Wilson do, but a motor like this that has good head flow, has enough camshaft, and enough displacement should respond to porting your manifold. I'm Richard Holden, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I got part 3 coming up, this time with nitrous and boost.